It's time to go into business for yourself. Get ready for another episode of the Franchise Academy Podcast. Education, insight, and inspiration. Here's your host, small business and franchise expert, Tom Scarda.
So welcome to another episode of the Franchise Academy Podcast. Special episode. I'm with my sidekick, partner, and wife, Gina. That's Gina, not ER, but in Brooklyn we speak Gina. Today we're doing a special episode about how to work with your spouse without going to jail. And Gina and I have worked together on projects in franchising over the years. We've owned 2 different franchises together, but we're also bringing in some experts with us. We have Dennis and Trisha Stetzel, and they are franchise owners of 2 different franchises right now. They are working together with Focal Point business coaching franchise, and Trisha is now in her second contract, I should say, yes, with Fetch Pet Care, which is definitely fun. Great podcast she did earlier. So check out Franchise Frontrunner with Trish. And so I want to welcome Dennis and Trish. How are you?
Hi, Dennis and Trish.
Thanks for having us.
This is
Gina and Tom, right?
Yeah, I wanted to use as my theme song, Tom and Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. Tom used to work on
That's how we get people to remember our names.
Okay.
If you remember that song, Tom used to work in the dog, and Gina worked in the diner all day, living on a prayer. So, I really want to thank you guys for coming on. You guys have really an impressive background, but you work together. And what we found over the years, and as I speak to franchise owners all over the country, I find that couples sometimes get into a jam as they're working together. And I know that we did in the early years. We were married probably for a good 10 or 12 years when we bought our first Maui Wowie smoothie business. And we're working in the booth, and Gina's slinging smoothies and talking to customers, and she was really outgoing. And I was like, who is this woman? I don't even know this person. She was like totally different. And it was something that I had a real hard time getting my hands around. So we're going to talk about how to deal with your spouse and giving them boundaries is something that you guys wanted to talk about as well. So anyway, so for you guys, for Dennis, what was the biggest challenge that you have seen or that you experienced working with Trish in a business?
And so we've been working together for 27, 28 years. Yeah. So we were both in the military together. So when we first started working together and we worked together, I think we got one of the best compliments, and it was unsolicited. There was Master Chief Beasley, never forget his name. He found out that we were together, and he pulled us in and said, we thought we were in trouble.
We did think we were in trouble.
We're like, we're in trouble.
We're in trouble for dating.
Yeah, he pulled us in, and he said, had no one ever told me, I would never know you guys are together, which was a huge compliment, right? Because it's about, the boundaries that you set, right, between work and home. And so I think because of that military background, right, you definitely separate your military life from your home life. Plus we were in Navy intelligence. So you can't, even if you wanted to, you couldn't carry it out of the office. So I think that foundationally made it maybe a little bit more easy as we moved into the corporate and the franchise systems.
Well, and not only did we work together, but we both worked in the same jobs, in the same position for probably the first 15 years we were together. Yeah. At the exact same level. So it was always 50-50, and we were very competitive with each other, which can be good and bad, but we were always doing the same job.
Yeah. I think probably the biggest lesson here recently, so in the recent context, I got my first coaching certification in 2014. And what I learned was don't use that on your spouse.
No.
Don't coach your spouse.
It was bad.
Don't, right? And so, even though it's been 27, 28 years, as recent as 2014, 2015, there was another lesson to be learned, right? Which was,
There's always a lesson to be learned.
I've acquired this new skill, but don't practice it and don't impose it on your partner, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you have a couple of stories like that. So, Gina was a New York City police officer when we first went into business. I was working for the transit system in New York City, and I remember working very clearly one day at the Javits Center, the convention center in Manhattan, and one of our staff members came to us, and she was a young lady at the time, going back 20 years now, and she said, "I really admire the way you guys work together." And I use that as kind of a foundation for what I want in my life as I grow up. So I realized that, your employees are always watching you, as your kids are always watching you, and you're trying to you're setting a good example. I mean, that was not our mission, was to set an example. That's what we did. And she was inspired by Gina being, a female business owner like you, Trish, and really, I think that's really important for younger women to see is, number one, the interpersonal contact and communication that a couple has in a business, but also setting an example as a woman who could own their own business. You don't have to, it's always like the role models and society models, but I think you ladies have a really important role, more than Dennis and I do, in teaching young women about that. So you're doing that with the education program at CW Post. Right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mentoring matters.
So talk about that.
Well, since I retired, why am I talking about that? I want them to talk.
Well, you have to tell us what it is, at least.
Well, there is a mentoring program for inner city youths that, and they bring in. It's not just girls. It's all inner city youths for different professionals to teach them and coach them and mentor them. And I've been doing that for the past few years. It's a lot of fun. But right now, my new thing is acting. So that's what I'm coaching them on. So it's kind of fun. But so yeah, it wasn't always easy working together. Let me tell you that much. It was a little difficult.
But there was two tools that helped us through getting over the rough spots. One was the personality profile.
Mm-hmm.
You guys were talking about the DISC program.
Let's talk about that.
That's one tool. So
and I will say, Gina, interestingly enough, just in the last few years, we've taken Myers-Briggs over the years and those sorts of things, and never really compared them until we both started coaching people, and we started looking at our DISC profiles, and wow, are we different people?
Yeah.
And we actually learned to work together without even realizing how different we were from each other and how to even interact. I always thought he wasn't listening. Well, why don't you just give me an answer? Can't you just give me an answer? Hurry up and answer me, because that's my personality profile. Where Dennis is completely opposite of me and needs to think about the things that he wants to say before he says them. So realizing that has even helped us more in our inner workings. And now that we're doing presentations together as business coaches, it's so helpful to know that it's okay to be different from each other, and we can play off of the things where we're similar.
Absolutely.
And again, and there's the strengths there as well. So for Trisha's far more outgoing, networking, engaging, right? I'm far more the introvert, the thinker, and I wait until I actually have my thoughts put together before I open my mouth. And that works very, very well. And I understand that that's her strength, and she understands that it's not. So if we go to an event and it's filled with lots of extroverts who are networking and exchanging cards and telling stories, there's no expectation on me that I'm going to jump right in and be the center of attention, right? That's just not my forum.
Right.
Now, if we're in a different forum where it's far more structured, right, that's where I excel. And so being able to recognize that we have those strengths and they're different strengths and leveraging those, I think that's been huge, especially over the last couple of years.
Well, and for those of you who are disc lovers and want to know, as you probably already suspected, I'm a high I. And this one here is a high C. Yeah. And I think we've changed even over the years. When we first met, I suspect if we had tested, Dennis probably would have been a high D.
Very high.
And I would have been a high S. I was very introverted and very people-oriented and a people pleaser, where Dennis could care less about what people thought, and he was just, on a mission. And over the years, maybe we've taken on each other's personalities or profiles, if you will, but certainly found a way to work together without going to jail.
Right. They definitely do change, right? I mean, your personalities can change and morph into each other, but I think we're exactly the same as you two. And I think because of that, it worked better because we did recognize the other person's strengths and the other person's weaknesses. And I don't know if we were both, the same personality, high D's or something, it would have not been a good thing. Right. It would not. But the other tool that we always, we came across many years ago, the book, The 5 Love Languages. And it's very similar to the personality traits, the DISC profile, but it talks about how you express and receive love. And really, that helped us tremendously because we realized that he is, did you ever read that book?
No.
Oh, it's a good one.
It's The 5 Love Languages by Dr. David Chapman, PhD. And there's different versions. There's love languages for men, and they have all the different versions. Right. But the first book is just tremendous, and it breaks down love languages in 5 different categories. And then you take a little test at the end of it and figure out what category is you. And just like DISC, once you understand yourself, then you can understand the world. And I thought I think it saved our marriage actually at one point because
definitely
because we were totally different spectrums. I mean, you couldn't be more opposite in love languages. Mm-hmm. And so once we learned that,
his love language is really annoying though.
Right. So my love language, they call it acts of service, which is I like for somebody to clean and cook and do all that stuff like a mom. And she doesn't do that. And her number one at the time, and it has changed over the years, but her number one at that time, going back 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was touch and feel, right? It was touch,
not feel.
I like to feel.
He's making it dirty now. No, it just and he's not.
I'm not touchy-feely.
No, he's not. He's not a hugger. He's not, and I am. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there. So now it's for me. It's words of affirmation and appreciation. But
and gifts is another one. Neither of us really have gifts in our love language, which is good. Keeps the economy down for us.
Keeps our budget down.
Keeps the budget down.
Or spending.
But Gina would want to sit and watch TV and hold hands. I'm like, why do we have to hold hands watching TV? I want to, it's like just a thing. So to your point, once you know who you are, it's fantastic. So my question for you guys, especially as coaches, what's the first piece of advice you would give to a couple that's just starting a business together? Mm-hmm. What do you think they should know?
I would say it's that DISC, take the DISC. Inform yourself and about the partner you're going to be working with. And that transcends married couples working together. I mean, that's any partnership. Right. So I think it always starts with that. Understand what your strengths are, understand the strengths of your partner, and capitalize on those.
Yeah. And whether it's DISC or the 5 love languages or some kind of assessment, right, where you can do some self-inventory and really figure out how compatible are you in the beginning and how much are you going to have to give and take, in that relationship, in that business relationship. And I'll tell you, when you talked about Tom not being a hugger, I got Dennis over that because I brought him to Texas and introduced him to my family. he instantly became a hugger. So, because you don't have a choice.
No.
Yeah. So not only, we come from, although we're both very competitive and both came from a technical background, we came from very different upbringings. He is what my family would consider a Yankee, if you're allowed to say that anymore. And of course, I came from the deep South. So the two of us getting together, 20 long years ago, 27, 28 long years ago, was interesting, right? Because we did come from very different backgrounds and families in the way that we were either treated, or hugged or not hugged, right?
Yeah. But I think that's a great point that you made, is that when you're working with a spouse, and it could be just the husband and wife that started a business or franchise, it's still a partnership, just as if it were two friends or two strangers that decided to join forces to open up a business. And my advice is to actually have an organizational chart and put the person in place that has the best suited skills for whatever the task is. So when you were talking about going into a room and there's 100 people networking, and kind of Dennis has really a strong enough personality to step back and let Tricia step in, that is a big thing. It reminds me of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. You know who Steve Jobs was all those years? You didn't really know the great Woz. But now, of course, now you know him. But there's a lot of partnerships that are like that. Bill and Melinda Gates, great example. Even, the Obamas. I mean, there's so many people you can look to that have had successful, business relationships that were married. And so you guys do that well. And I appreciate you bringing that out.
And if you take it one step further and kind of flip it into, doing business. So there's us being able to interact together in a way that doesn't get us in jail. But then also, right, there are people on the receiving end who are going to receive things differently and are going to be more compatible to the outgoing, in your face, high eye, networking kind of person. And someone else is going to say, Ash, I'm not sure. Like, some of my best referrals come from her because she can recognize the people who are going to interact with me better. And it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. If I handed you a $10 bill and said, did this come from an extrovert or an introvert? You wouldn't be able to tell. So from a business perspective, you want to be able to relate to as many different people as possible, because that money spends the same. That business comes in, that revenue comes in, and it doesn't matter what their personality is. It doesn't matter what they like or dislike. I mean, they need to be aligned with your values. But certainly, if I'm going to interact better with somebody and she can push them to me, or I can push them to her because I know that they're not my people.
Right. It's a little bit of mirror and matching when you're dealing with people. There are sometimes when I talk to somebody on the phone and they're talking so slow and so deliberate, I want to rip my eyes out. No, please. I give it to him because he can deal with it. I cannot. You have a New York girl from Brooklyn. I have to go. Let's go. I want to just yank the words out of their mouth sometimes. But so I'm not that person. I leave those people to him.
Right, but you got to be strong enough to give up that lead, if you will, and give it to your partner to handle. Because after all, you're in it together. So you can't be all things to everyone, and you need to recognize that in business.
Tom is a very, he likes to think before he talks, and he likes to do everything deliberate. You should see him try to talk to Alexa. It's very funny. I should record that one day. Yeah. It takes him 5 practices to get her to give him information.
Well, between that and my Brooklyn accent, Alexa's just not understanding me. It's very frustrating.
I swear I offended Alexa so deeply. No. She turned off our internet.
Oh no! Yeah, what did you do?
We went offline for like 5 minutes. All the lights turned red. It was really bad.
I think it was over music.
Yeah,
too.
It was.
Oh gosh,
that's super.
That's funny.
I love that, man. So,
go ahead.
I was going to say to keep Gina on track because she's going to go off on tangents now. So today is March 24th, 2020, and we're in the middle of a quarantine lockdown situation in New York and a lot of the country. So how do you work with your spouse while being quarantined?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I will tell you, as of midnight tonight, the county that we live in is on, it's more than a stay-at-home order.
Kind of shelter at home.
Yeah, shelter in place.
Shelter in place,
So you're still able to go out and get groceries and those sorts of things. Now, I operate my pet care business in 2 other counties, which have not yet put that in place. And by the way, just a little plug for the pet industry. We are considered essential services. So we're continue to operate bare bones, but we're still able to operate, especially help those that are in first responder type positions, right? And nurses and doctors who need pet care. So we're shelter in place. We've been trying to do that regularly, really, for a couple of weeks because my mother lives with us and she's in her 70s. So we've been trying to be careful about bringing any viruses into the house and having contact with other people.
What state are you in?
We're in Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas.
And we're about 25 miles south of Houston and north of Galveston. And we do have separate offices in our house because we are child empty nesters. My mom lives here, but we don't have kids at home anymore. So we have separate offices. And that's where the balance and boundaries comes in, right, Tom, that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And really setting, if you need to come through, don't walk through my office because it's really easy to walk through my office to go to your office, but I might actually be on the phone having a conversation with someone. Yep. So we just had to set some boundaries around who's doing what, but we also do things together.
Yeah. So maintaining our own schedules and our own office space is key, right? Because I have my things. I like the way that they're organized. I have my own set of calls. And we do, just like any other good partnership, we have a board meeting every week. It's 2 hours, and we do everything from an action items review to a calendar sync to prep sessions, going over upcoming events, right? There's a structured agenda, and that helps to set because it would be really easy for me to assume, well, gosh, 2:00 on Tuesday, that sounds like a really convenient time, but we don't add anything jointly to the calendar unless it comes as a result of the calendar sync, right? So it's having that respect for the space and the time in a business context. So in the home, being quarantined, we've been set up like this for a while, and that's worked really well. So the quarantine, just from a day-to-day perspective, hasn't really impacted us much.
Not from a regular perspective, but all of our events have absolutely been affected. So last week we went online for the first time to hold an event. Wednesday was our first one. Yeah. I had 15 live people that were paid and ready to come to the event that we changed to online, and we ended up with 39 participants when we went virtual. So people are still supporting, and we're really wanting to support the community and keep people's emotions, the emotions low and the positivity high, because it's so important right now. People who haven't worked from home don't understand, and trying to create this sense of community, I've been calling it Together from Home, is really important for people who haven't been separated from people and are used to going into the office.
It's true. And not on that point, since you've been doing it, what kind of advice would you give people who all of a sudden find themselves having to work from home and they're not used to this? It's like it's a big change for them. What's the most important thing that you would say that they need to do?
Well, so I started play with the technology, play with it. You can't break it. Like the software that we're using, the video conferencing that we're using, it's been in use for a long time in very large companies that operate at global scales. You're not going to break it. You might push the wrong button. You might drop from the call, but that's the worst that's going to happen.
Right.
So play with it, get comfortable with it, experiment, right? And have a little fun with it, right? Yep. These are not, these calls that were taken from home, and believe me, having worked with IBM, with Pearson, with large logo names, even your most senior executive makes that mistake and goofs up his video feed, or doesn't have the perfect lighting.
I think the senior people are the ones having the most problem with it.
Right. So just don't be afraid of it, right? Jump in 2 feet and just go after it, because it takes experience, and you got to do it repetitively. So just don't be afraid of it. And as I said at the beginning of our most recent virtual sessions, we just give permission up front. Go push buttons. Go try the virtual backgrounds. Practice raising your hand. If you raise your hand 5 times and you didn't mean to, that's okay, right? But get familiar, get comfortable with the technology, and it'll just become second nature. We don't want this to become second nature in the long term, but in the short term, just experiment.
Yeah, and I have a very simple piece of advice to people who have never worked from home before. Stay on schedule. Get out of bed, take a shower, get dressed, and go to work, even if it's at a desk in the side of your master bedroom. Have a routine, because once you get out of that routine, we're all in trouble. You're going to stop showering, you're going to stop getting dressed, and your positivity is going to start to diminish, right? So the schedule is super, super, super important when you start to work from home.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I have kind of a funny story on that. So the first time I was allowed to work from home, I would wake up, I'd go to the computer, and I'd start working. And our son at the time, I think he was in 7th grade. And he came in one day after me working from home for about a month, 2 months. So it's still kind of new to me. And he said, "Dad, did you get fired?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, why?" And this was before video, right?
What'd you hear?
Well, I said, "No, why?" And he said, "Well, because when I leave for school, you're sitting at the computer in your pajamas with a coffee cup and trail mix. And then I come home and you're still in your pajamas with a coffee cup and trail mix." And that was like my wake up call. Okay, so get up, take a shower, look presentable, especially before the boy comes home, because that's not good for him to see. Right?
That's true.
So get into the routine, and we do at 5:00. Things shut down, and even if we have other things to do, we go make dinner.
We're making dinner together. We're making lunches together. And then, if we still have work to do, then we do that afterwards. But we still have our family time. And that's another big thing, with all the kids home from school right now, and it's chaotic. Some of the kids haven't started school programs yet. I know that's supposed to start here next week. But you have to have a schedule for your children and your family as well. And again, that's where balance and boundaries comes in. You can't sit in front of your computer and work from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m. without taking a break and having family time. It's super important. Look at Tom. He's like, "What? You can't?"
I haven't seen him in a week.
And I got so much to do, but you're so right, is that you need to have that schedule. You need to treat it like it's a job. And if you got, if you're watching this now and you got, kind of thrown out of your office and told to work from home, and you don't have a spare office, you live in an apartment somewhere, and your kids are running around, set up your office, even if it's your bed as your desk. I just talked to a colleague of mine. She's using an ironing board as a stand-up desk.
What are you gonna do?
Like, I don't iron, so I might as well do this. I was like, okay.
And I think that's important too, to have a space.
You got to have the space, even if you have to break it down at night.
Space.
Right, you have to break it down at night and go to bed, but you need to have that space. You need to have your pencils, and you need to have your your notebook, and
not in your bedroom.
And it's best to not have it in your bedroom. At this point, some people don't have a choice, but if you do have a choice, do not use the bedroom. You have to keep your sleep away. We read this in an article a few months ago, actually.
Don't do anything but in your bedroom, but sleep and,
Well, whatever. It's not going to get nasty. But, so that's a really, really important thing. And just to follow up on Dennis's story, when my son was in 6th grade and I was working from home, he came home and said something similar. He goes, "Dad, all my friends think that you're in the mafia." And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, because you're home during the day, you're home at night, and you drive a nice car." Mafia? Why can't it be like a banker that works from home? So it's so funny the things that go through kids' minds. It's hysterical, actually. But these are really, really good points. And also Trisha's point about taking a shower, not kidding. You really need to wake up, take a shower, get dressed, dress nice. Just don't put on sweats, but put on a shirt, and be presentable. It'll make you feel better. And that will really impact your work. It'll impact the way you sound on the phone or on video, because now all of us are doing video conferencing. And I think also, follow up on another point that Dennis made, I think video conferencing will be here to stay for a lot of people, depending on what it is for, which will cut down on costs. I think it's good. I get pretty personal doing my consultations for franchise owners, through video conferencing, much better than the phone. If I can't get to somebody across the country, video is awesome for that. So embrace video and embrace whatever platform it is that you enjoy, and try several platforms. There's a lot out there. Some are free, some are paid. Try them all.
Yeah. The great thing about video is, you only have to dress from the waist up.
No one knows what they got on the bottom half. Right.
Comfortable shoes. There you go. Yeah.
Tennis sneakers on. But
well, and when you're in Texas and it's 100 degrees in the summer, you can bet we're not wearing sweats.
Yep. That's interesting. And culturally, it makes a big difference, right? If you work, depending on where you're working, if you're in Manhattan or in LA, or if you're in Houston or Dallas, it's a different vibe. Mm-hmm. I've noticed as I travel the country, as I know Dennis does a lot of traveling, you really see different cultures in the way they act for work and the way they dress, what they talk about. It's very, very interesting in that respect.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
So this is cool. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you would leave for someone that is quarantined with their spouse while trying to work?
So for me, it's about creating as much normalcy as you can in your workday and with your family. So our kids and our moms and other people who are living with us are not necessarily going to understand that we are working from home. So we do have to set those boundaries. We need to be behind a closed door when we're working, and set some guidelines or some rules with your family that you really are working from home, and that this is important to you, and that you need to keep doing that to keep a normal schedule. So I think that's the best advice I could give even myself, being stuck at home, because no one wants to be at home 24/7, right? And that's kind of the world we're going to be in for the next week or so, at least.
Yeah. And I think just from a relationship perspective, make sure you take those breaks, and maybe your spouse, your partner, include them in those breaks, check in on them. Mm-hmm. Right? It's really, really easy. I do it. Everyone does it. You get involved in something. You're at home. Nothing's really bothering you. Your head's down. And before you know it, the whole day has gone by and you haven't lifted your head. Well, one of the advantages of having a spouse that actually cares about you is, they can come check on you and kind of force you, hey, time to take a break. Let's go down and have a coffee, or let's go let the dogs out, or you want to have some lunch. I mean, something like that. I would say just check in often. If you're stuck in the house, don't just assume that someone, the extrovert sitting in the other room is just okay being locked in the room. So
yeah, this is tough for extroverts. This whole quarantine thing is very tough for us, especially. Yeah. Introverts are great. You're happy as a clam right now, but we're having a little bit of a difficult time. It's not.
Yeah. And also, I think millennials are handling it pretty well. I know that my kids are millennials, and they said, "You don't understand, Dad. We've been practicing for this since middle school."
Everything, all their social interactions are online, so it's kind of great.
Yeah, for them, it's kind of easy. You have any advice?
Advice? No, I don't have any advice. I was in my head, I was about to talk about dogs because they mentioned dogs.
So talk about
dogs. And too, I'll go back to schedule and normalcy. That's what our pets are looking for from us, mm-hmm. right? If you think about their behavior, if you think that your dog is acting or feeling depressed, it's because they're taking your energy on. Yeah. We're on lockdown, but you're still allowed to walk your dogs. So get out, even if you just have to go in your backyard and take your dogs out, because it's very important that they continue to have their routine and their social interactions with
True. I was feeling that yesterday. I felt like my dog was, because we couldn't go out yesterday because it was raining, and
It was raining bad.
and she just was walking around whining, and just, I feel so bad. We're so connected to them, right? Do you have dogs?
We do. We have 3 dogs.
Great.
And they're actually, believe it or not, all in here passed out on the floor.
What kind of dogs?
We have a 4-pound Chihuahua, and we have 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers that are about 25 pounds.
Nice.
Wow. That's very cool. We have
a bird that's downstairs on quarantine because he screams. So what kind of dog do you have?
We have a 1-year-old Burmese
A Bernedoodle.
Bernedoodle.
Oh, I didn't even know there was such a thing. That's sweet.
Yeah.
She's adorable. She's a mini. Her father was a 4-pound poodle, but her mother was a Bernese Mountain Dog.
Oh my goodness. Oh, awesome.
Interesting.
Well, and know that I heard this morning through the Fetch Pet Care franchise channels that pet care was actually going to be on the essential list for the federal government as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
it is important. You can't, government workers and these nurses and doctors, they just like having kids. You can't just leave a dog for the entire day.
Right.
Right. Especially, a lot of the workers are good. If they're not already on 12-hour shifts, they will be on 12-hour shifts as healthcare workers and first responders.
Right.
Yeah.
So my gratitude goes out to all the first responders.
Absolutely.
And I know all 4 of us here on this call are really grateful, for the men and women that do the stuff that needs to be done right now. It's pretty heavy duty, actually.
Yeah.
Well,
For sure.
this is good.
So, yeah. And so I appreciate you guys coming on. And I wanted to just say that I have a lot of information going out about franchise ownership, how to run a franchise during this crisis, how to buy a franchise during this crisis as well. So check out those videos, and I'm doing webinars and things like that. So plug in. If you know anybody, please share it. And let's help get this country back on track.
Absolutely.
Sure. Thank you so much,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Thank you very much, Gina.
It was so great talking to you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
This is great. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of the Franchise Academy Podcast. For more info, go to our website, thefranchiseacademypodcast.com. Remember to subscribe to Tom Scarda's YouTube channel for educational videos on franchising, education, insight, and inspiration.